Kasaravalli.
Recording is on.
So, Mr. Girish Kasaravalli has made about 14 films, and his career has spanned over 4 decades. And he's a gold medalist in FTII Pune. He's also the recipient of the Presidential Lotus for his very first feature film, Ghatashraddha. And alongside with that, he has won multiple international, national, and state awards. He has a film coming up in 2020 or 2021, I'm supposing. Na illi iralare, allige hogalare. So we are eagerly waiting for that, sir. So, if I may set up a few ground rules before we begin. We would like to go by discussing the film first, and then sir's filmography, and then your thoughts about film in general. So, I'll open with a question about the film, and the rest of you can catch on. And before you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand so I can moderate that. So, sir, this is your first and only film on urbanism. Could you tell us more about what prompted you to make Ghar?
Actually, this is based on a novel by P.G. Raghava. I had read this novel quite some time ago, and I find the content very, appropriate and timely. There was also the time when the India is thinking of opening up its economy. So I thought, I'm trying to an attempt to understand the consequences would be interesting. So I picked up this novel and elaborated and made a film out of that. Yes.
So it has been historically seen that you make a lot of changes with the story you pick up from these novels. Could you also tell us more about the changes you made after you picked up the story from the novel?
Right now, I can't recollect what are the changes that I have carried out. But I have tried to draw parallels with the contemporary Indian realities, contemporary Indian political scenario, which I think was not there in the novel. I could be wrong because it's almost 3 decades now since I made the film. And in the original novel, I think the shed owners attack Rajanna in the end. I didn't want that end. I wanted to say how, there's a kind of a circular motif in the whole film. And I wanted that to be established because, especially in the urban situation, we don't even care much for the social this one. And I wanted to highlight how Rajanna's self-interest blinds him from what is happening outside. So that, in that sense, I made it some kind of an introspective film about the urban middle class society.
Interesting. So, with films that really explore urbanism and a city in general, a city as a character, we see the characters mostly juxtaposed with the background of the city. But with Ghar, we don't really notice that. And we don't really get a strong connection with the spatial surroundings of the characters. Was this a conscious choice, or did you have anything more to say?
See, there's, in fact, I deliberately didn't highlight much about the city of Bangalore, because if I highlight the city of Bangalore, then it becomes a story of city of Bangalore, not the story of urbanization. And a man coming from a rural agrarian society, a man who moves into the urban society from a rural agricultural society, how does the value system change? How does it affect him? See, that kind of a emphasis will be lost. That's why I didn't concentrate that this is happening in Bangalore. All that I say is this is happening in a city like it's a metro city, a big city, and I'm trying to not talk about the social problems that hog the metro city, but I trying to explain how that moving into the urban society changes the value system, how it affects the man like Rajana who comes from a village. So my stress is something different, you know.
So someone has raised their hand. Fellow Jits here, you can please go ahead.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you're good.
Yes, yes. Good, good.
Okay. One thing that intrigued me throughout the movie, which I thought would sort of be explained towards the end, but either I didn't catch it or it wasn't actually, was the significance of the bed and the unique shape of the bed in the movie. The glittering mirrors and a slightly creepy look to it. If I don't know if it was just me seeing it that way, but any significance, or was it supposed to be a metaphor or portray something?
Yeah, I intended to be a metaphor. See, the film is about the conjugal relationship between husband and wife, how it is affected because of the external happening. You know? So I wanted a kind of a stage in which the relationship between husband and wife flourish. What better metaphor than the bed itself? So instead of using a normal bed, I thought, why not I bring a kind of a surrealistic look to it, and there are also some dialogues within the film wherein his Rajana says, I think they wanted to pull it out of the room, remove it out of the room, but they are not able to do it. So they say, I think the bed was born here itself in the room itself. So that kind of references, would make it not merely as a bed, but
Hmm.
as a something, a stage for something else. It's a
Hmm.
metaphor. And much of the tensions between husband and wife
Right.
happen either on the bed or
Right.
below the bed.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
that way, the bed wanted to be I wanted bed to be a very strong indicator of the changing value system in the life of Rajana and Geeta.
So sort of a negative influence on the relationship, just like the city was also sort of polluting their marriage and their understanding
Yeah.
between each other.
Well, city has a negative impact, not the bed, but bed only serves as a place where these things get unraveled.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That was really illuminating. Now that I understand it, sort of giving me goosebumps now. So, thank you, Kasarole sir.
Yeah. Welcome.
So there was also the aspect of the protagonists sticking to their old traditions of Griha Pravesha and
Yeah.
numerous other traditions for that matter. So there was an instance where Bargur Ramchandrappa mentions that Bangaloreans are essentially jeans pant horage, madi panche horage in his Prabandha.
Yeah.
So were you also trying to hint at pseudo rationalist and an imagined urban space in the film,
I,
sir?
I would like to call it as pseudo rationalists, but you see, what happens is we live in many worlds simultaneously. Especially a man like Rajana, who has come from the agrarian society with the values of agrarian society imbibed in him, especially the traditional society. He moves into the urban system, and all of a sudden he can't change. He can't. He still has those values. And there is a scene in the film wherein Rajana and Geeta go to a park in the night and start looking for a very calm atmosphere. There they notice a flowering tree, which it reminds them of their village house. So this kind of a thing, you are looking for a kind of a solace in an urban setting, which is where you don't get it at all. So I just wanted to talk about such things, like the moment you. I will also tell you why I have made this film. I think you must have read this somewhere else also. 1986-87, when Rajiv Gandhi took over as the Prime Minister of India, he made a statement, let us leap to the 21st century. This whole word, leap, suddenly, made me think, what are the consequences? When you say leap, it's not a running race. You see, the society is not a running race. You can't treat the society like a running race. You have people who are brought up in different social structures with different values. You cannot overnight change the whole thing. So, what would happen then? You have to let some time to kind of to for some osmosis to take place between old values and the new values. And this is the time when Rajana gets into Bangalore. And I'm also hinting at certain things because his value system is very traditional system which which he has imbibed in a traditional society. Now he has moved into Bangalore where the values are different, and that is actually the problem which makes him restless. It's not so much the outside world, it is this world within himself, his value system, his acceptance of certain values and non-acceptance of certain values or certain things, which are creating tension. Look at his relationship with his aunt. He wants her to help him out, but he doesn't want Geeta to go with her. This kind of value system, why does it come from? From where does it come from? It comes from his traditional lookout. I wanted to highlight all these things. So that's why it's if you merely say it's a problem of urbanization, I would say my film is not talking about just that. It's also the time, it's also addressing this kind of conflict in values, conflict in our upbringing, conflict in our outlook. That is very important. That is what I'm trying to highlight.
Interesting. Thank you, sir. And Anirudh, you can go ahead with your question.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
So when I was watching this movie, and before the movie, everyone were talking about urbanism and how the city was there. But throughout the film, what I saw one thing in common was uh, Rajanna, Geeta, and the aunt. All the three were looking for existentialism in their oneself and finding an identity. So they're
Yeah.
coming from a rural background, coming to an urban setup. They're looking for identity. The starting few line, especially where they were talking about their dream house or how it should be, how a compound should be, and what all things were there. So I felt more for me personally, more than the urbanism thing, the psychological aspect of the movie was really interesting. And at the end, when he realized, okay, what I wanted and what the actual reality is two different things. So this was the parallel where I saw.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, all their dreams, all their aspirations were not from urban citizen. They're all from rural citizen, having a house on top of a hill, having, flower all around, flowering plants all around. All such things are not the dream of an urban Indian. So this kind of a conflict, that's why I said the film talks about such shift in paradigms which Rajanna or Geeta are not have not been able to accept it. They have not even realized. Forget about accepting. They have not even realized. They haven't even realized it. Except, of course, halfway through the film, Geeta starts accepting the changes in values, but not Rajanna. Rajanna accepts it only in the last scene on the terrace with the tube lights on.
So, speaking of the climax and the terrace in particular, we see them break apart and move away from each other, and we spend a lot of time doing that. But it seems like we spend very little time with them reconciliating with each other. Were you hinting at the superficial nature of relationships in these urbanscapes, or was there something more?
No. It's not.
Than-
I'm not talking about the superficial nature of the thing, but then the last shot on the terrace where they hug each other. It shows that there's some kind of not a total reconciliation, but then at least Rajana has realized his mistakes. Rajana realizes that Gita is not at fault, but then he realizes there's a dialogue. He says, "I am growing hollow from within." That is something which for me is more important than total reconciliation, because total reconciliation is just a kind of a dream or kind of a utopic resolution. But I didn't want to end up with that. What I wanted to say was, at one point he realizes the sacrifices or the humiliation. Sacrifice is not the right word. The humiliation is the right word. The humiliation to which Rajana subjected Gita, and then he realizes, that he was very unfair to his wife. That's when he hugs her. And also, if you look at the denouement, he starts going in search of the slum to the slum, looking for the shed owner. What am I trying to say? That's totally a different reason altogether, because the house, in the very first beginning, he says, the owner of the house says, house is not a mere a construction of four walls. It's where the mind grows, it's where the soul grows and all that. So so that's why these people start looking for some kind of a solace in the new house. That's why they want to shift from this place to somewhere else. Who gets him the house? The shed owner. But what has he done? He has destroyed their lives. Rajana, which is very narrow-mindedness, he got their houses, their shed vacated, and on the end, we also know their houses being demolished. So there's an irony here. Rajana is looking for an ideal house, whereas he is instrumental in destroying the ideal house of the shed owner. So that kind of ironical this one flows right through the film.
True, true. Thank you, sir. And Chiranjeevi, you can go ahead with your question. Chiranjeevi, you can go ahead with your question. He's been unresponsive. So, also additionally, sir, since we were also talking about this being your first film on urbanism, this is also your first film made in two languages. Was there any particular reason for that choice?
Well, I didn't want to make it in Hindi at all, but I wanted a decent budget. So when I approached NFDC, they said they can't give that much of budget for a Kannada film. So they said, why don't you make it in bilingual? Why don't you make it a bilingual? So I was forced to do it, but that's not my choice, right? So that's also the reason why I had to take people like Nasiruddin Shah, Deepthi Naval, and Rohini Attangadi. Otherwise, it would have been Kannada actors and actresses.
Did you have any preferences before going with Naziruddin Shah?
Yeah, in fact, first preference was Kamal Hassan, but Kamal Hassan didn't want to do an art film. So because no Kannada film, no Kannada stars would have been accepted in the Hindi belt. So I had to go for Hindi stars. Nasiruddin Shah being my classmate, I thought it would be much easier to work with him.
Interesting. That's a wonderful trivia, sir. Thank you. So, Chiranjeevi, if you are here, you can go ahead with your question, or I'll jump to the next one. Okay. So, speaking about nuances, the one particular nuance we would not have missed in any way is the sound. So, was there seems to have been a metaphorical interweaving of the shed sound particularly into the film. So, was it something? Was it an indication of Rajanna's hypocrisy while dealing with his company and his industry being extremely loud, but him losing his patience with the shed dwellers, or was it a shattered promise about
No, actually,
privacy?
no, what I was trying to highlight is that, Rajanna, when he goes for work, in his work premise, it's full of noise, which he doesn't mind. But in his house, he wants silence. But he doesn't realize, you know, the shed owners, for them, that is a life. So they have to work, they have to create noise. So, I wanted to bring out this dichotomy in our perception, in our outlook, that we become very, when it, we tolerate certain things when it goes around our life, but we become intolerant for certain things which doesn't concern us. We don't look at it from different perspectives. So I wanted to highlight that.
Interesting.
Because for shed owners, it is as much as life. It's as much they have to make work in the night so as to survive. Like Rajan has to work during the day to survive. So how can one be a nuisance, the other is acceptable?
True. So, fellow Jitsir, you can go ahead with your question. Fellow Jitsir, you can go ahead with your question. You haven't unmuted yourself. You need to unmute yourself. We're not getting any audio from your end. Whilst you fix your audio, I have another question regarding your color choices, sir. So, the color tone and the visual tone in your film seem very different from your other films. Could you tell us more about your choices?
Not very different from other films, because I have used these colors in other films also, say in Thaayi Saheba, in Nine Erlo, and other films. But here it's since the film I have used minimalism as the format, it becomes obvious. See what happens in picking up the details in cinema, whether it is sound or in color or visual metaphors. The codification becomes a very important element. How do we codify certain things? When we codify certain things, it's either because of cultural codification, or within the context of the work of art, or certain notions that we carry, in our social life. Like the moment you see a red flag, it's a Marxist, he's a communist. At the moment you see, green shawl strung around the neck, they are farmers. So they are all actually social codification. Whereas there are certain codification which are purely cultural. Say, for example, you take the haldi, turmeric and the kumkum in the way how it is used in the film. The moment you see haldi and kumkum, you all associate with the marriage. So one is talking about the relationship between husband and wife, and if you keep continue to analyze follow the color codification, then you see suddenly towards the end, the film is moving towards yellow from red. Do you know that? So, but in terms of pure physical, this one, the moment you see more of yellow, it makes you slightly restless. Nothing to do with the cultural codification. It's purely physical. So, in that kind of a codification, you have to think in terms of the psychological impact the color gives on the mind of the viewer. I wanted to bring that in because you see, in that towards the end, Rajanna paints the entire house with yellow, with turmeric, because that keeps ants away. Just imagine what would happen to a person if one stays in the house which is painted with, say, yellow. I can't imagine because it makes me restless. It makes my BP go up. And if you look at the narrative structure of the film, that's also the time when Rajanna becomes very, very tense. So the narrative element is underlined by the color coding. So that way, it's very important for a filmmaker to understand any codification, whether it is cultural codification, social codification, or purely psychological codification. And whether it is sound, you talked about the factory sound, the shed sound, or creaking sound of the door in Thaayi Saheba. These things, they work as psychological codification. The color here works as cultural codification, right? So that's how I've used kumkum and haldi from the very beginning. And right through the film, they play a major part in the film.
Interesting. Thank you, sir. And Shivani, you can go ahead with your question.
Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the aesthetic choice and again about the sound, about the film. Personally, I noticed the silence more than I did with the sound. And along, pairing that along with your choice for the color palette, which is very steel grayish, in my opinion, and the fact that for example, you can't see the people's faces sometimes, and it's there's like a lack of people. Usually when I think about urbanism and all that, I imagine a lot of people, tight spaces and everybody just crowding up. But in this particular film, I feel like there is a unnatural lack of people. And I wanted to know, why did you go in that direction? Is there a particular reason for you to choose this, a very surreal kind of setting?
In fact, I partly explained this in my an answer to my previous question. I was actually thinking of using minimalism for this film so that I'm not talking about the social issue, but I am talking about the metaphorical significance of the issue. So if I show a lot of activities, the activities of the city, then people tend to understand the whole film from urbanization point of view. For me, urbanization is not the issue here. The value system that are affected because of the urbanization. So there's a difference between urbanization as such, like you see, you have traffic jams, and then overloaded roads. They're all problems of the urbanization. But the problem of intolerance, problem of not caring for others, is not the problem of the urbanization, but it's the problem of the mind, psychological impact of the urbanization. So that's one of the reasons why I try to avoid the traffic, the people, the busy streets. I don't even show which in any of the roads of Bangalore, because the moment I move to that, the emphasis will be shifted. As I told earlier, I want to shift the attention of the audience only towards this aspect of the domestic life, the tension within the family because of the urbanization. So, which is basically psychological, and also because of our upbringing, our concept of what is right and what is wrong, which has nothing to do with the social reality of the urbanization. So, in order to highlight that, I decided to use the minimalism as the structure of the film, and then to use wherever it's possible to bring in some kind of a, not total surrealism, some kind of a hint at surrealism. Because in the very first scene, how do I introduce the shed owner? You don't see the face, you only see the yellow hands. The shed owner has put on a glove which is in yellow in color. So through that, I'm trying to hint that this man is going to become a kind of a nuisance to Rajendra. So that is one of the reason I bring in a lot of such elements, like the boy, the child. You don't know whether it is real or it's imaginary. And towards the film, you move from the normal setting to a kind of a symmetry, Christian symmetry. Why did I go to Christian symmetry? Because I wanted the cross to be used later on with the tube lights. I tried to bring in kind of a symmetry like look to the on the terrace of the Rajana's house. So in that sense, most of the details slowly start acquiring metaphorical and symbolic significance. I don't want to use the word symbolic, but I am using it because many people immediately can understand that. Otherwise, I would like to use the term metaphorical significance to details. So that's one of the reasons why I concentrate more on the bed and the husband and wife relationship and the aunt, about whom both Rajanna and Geeta have different perspective, understanding of the character. In fact, if you notice certain things, except Geeta and Rajanna, nobody in the film has any name. You know them as police inspector, you know her as aunt, you know him as shed owner, you know the owner as owner, house owner. None of them have any names. The only only other name that you hear in the film is the boy for whom the shed owner is looking for. His name is Babu. So there are only three names in the film: Rajanna, Geeta, and Babu. If I wanted to construct the film in a realistic sense, I should have given names to all these people. I don't do it because of these reasons. If the moment you give them the names, it becomes realistic, and the audience tend to understand it as a realistic depiction of what is happening in that city around that time. I didn't want that to be a kind of a socio-political analysis of the system. I wanted to be more of a the kind of the impact of the outside world on the personal lives. Because whenever we talk about urbanization, we talk about the problems of the outside world. But urbanization also creates tension within our own mind. We never talk about it. Only probably, Antonini has talked about it, nobody else. So I wanted that to be, I wanted that to be tenure of my film, tenet of my film.
Interesting. And Sir Mohammed has a question for you, and it's on the chat. So, the auntie character in particular, was she a symbol of freedom for women? Was the urban life kinder to women, or provided solace and privileges denied by patriarchal rural life?
Certainly. You see, why does Rajanna dislike her? Because he still has the traditional value system in him. He thinks this lady has corrupt values, which Geeta slowly realizes that's not true. But in one sense, Aunt has liberated herself from these shackles, unlike Geeta. And that's why Geeta gets attracted to her. See what happens in the moment she gets attracted to the aunt. Rajana starts looking at start analyzing this from a very moralistic perspective. He is not ready to accept the character of aunt because he thinks, he looks at it from a very moralistic perspective. But aunt has a lot of justification for being like that. She says her marriage was not a very pleasant one. The people tried to misuse her and all that, and yet she survived. She is now has become a quite an influential person, yet she has a very very sad this one in interior, that which becomes very clear in the Christian graveyard scene. In the Christian graveyard scene, suddenly you realize that aunt is not so strong as we imagine. She has a very dark hurt feeling within herself, and she says she taunts Gita. She says, who she says, my house, and she chides her. She says, where is your house? It's either your father's house or your husband's house. Where do you live? Where do you have? So at least aunt can say it's my house. It's a very complicated issue. On one stage, on one strand, you see her being totally independent and a kind of a liberated soul, but at the same time she also has a very dark secrets within her where she's very humiliated, very hurt. So that way the film is so complex that you can't say this is the answer or this is the solution. I know. I don't want that kind of a simplistic analysis in any of my films. It's always complex. Who is right? Who is wrong? I don't know. All that I can say is at this juncture, if you look at it from this perspective, this is what has happened. If you look at it from other perspective, this is what has happened. If you can't make the audience look at the situation from different perspectives, then I would say the film is a failure.
Quite reflective of reality.
Only when you are, giving a multi narratives, a single narrative. Recently, I was seeing a video of a writer. She says the single narrative is very dangerous. Single narrative. I mean, this is what I have. I have come to believe very strongly that a film need to have within itself a very multiple narrative. Sometimes it might even look contradictory, but that's how you capture the complexity of life and complexity of our times as well.
Interesting and very reflective of reality as well. Thank you, sir. And Chiranjeevi has another question, and it's on chat. Sir, in the end of the movie, bulldozers will clear the hut/shed of the company, which Rajana works. Could you speak about it?
Yeah, it's a eternal search for a house which gives solace to our mind. And the irony here is that Rajan has destroyed the house of the shed owner, but he wants them help. He wants their help to get a house wherein he gets solace and where he gets peace of mind and all that. And which is the vehicle that is being used to destroy the house is the very same vehicle which is being manufactured in that SW company. So this kind of a whole cyclic, what happens in the of course now we have moved into our next phase, but I made this film when it was at the peak of industrial society. In in industries, what happened was most of the time we never realized where the object that we are creating is going to be used. You simply manufacture a bolt and nut without knowing where it is being used. You simply manufacturing a part of a system without knowing where it's being used. So he doesn't know. He only realizes that the material that he was, the tool that he was using, he was constructing, is being used in a earth mover, which is being used for to demolish the only hope of getting a right house. So it's a kind of a comment on the of course, that time this globalization was not, the term was not used, but I had read about Dunkel draft, and that was my reaction to Dunkel draft. In a very symbolic way, it's that it is going to destroy the peace of mind, the peace, the notion of a peaceful house.
Interesting. And given that the film was in some sense very ahead of its time, how was it received at its time of release?
When it was received, I know even some of the major critics turned it down. They said it's some of them, some critics even thought that whole shed, the metaphor of shed, is stretched too much. He said such things are not going to happen. But the same critic, after 20 years, now they say that they could see meaning in the film. There are many things in the film which didn't appeal to them. One is the minimalism itself was something which was unheard of. Second thing is it's a slightly underplayed drama, something which didn't. And that was the time when everyone is when everyone is using their film to criticize the social fabric of the society. I didn't talk about the social fabric at all. As I told you earlier, I do not even show the city because I didn't want to. Like there were films like some Hindi films made before that which talked about urbanization and its ill effects. I didn't want to repeat that. I wanted to say how it reflects in the minds of the people inside the house. So at that time it was not very well received. The film was not very well received, but now quite a few of my friends, critics who panned it, think it was they shouldn't have done that.
That's good revelation and realization. So, Anirudh, you can go ahead with your question.
Sir, in the movie, Geeta speaks about childbirth, whereas the aunt speaks about death. Was it like that narrative central to the story, or it was a parallel or sideline? How was it? Because you show cemetery also, and in another place in temple where the kumkum falls. So
Yeah.
was death signified there?
It's not exactly death, a feeling of hollowness growing within the aunt. There are a lot of references, like you see, she has rebelled, she has come out, and then, but she didn't get her due, and that's why she somewhere starts doubting whether she's right or wrong. But you in that scene where kumkum is spilled at the temple, Gita says, "Oh, I'm very sorry. I think your puja material have been spoiled." But aunt says, "Forget about it. I don't bother. But I am very sad that the young boy was, eating a ice cream, and that fell off. So I feel sorry for that." There's a big difference. You see, Gita is talking about puja and this one, but she is more worried about the boy losing the ice cream. So this kind of this one right there, it runs right through the film, and this kind of a shifting of priority, shifting of values is there right through the film. I also want, I don't know how many of you have noticed it, but I also consciously used interchanging of colors right through the film, and that is also there in the structure of the scene. In one scene, she says, I'm going to the temple. Would you come? Geeta says, no, I'm not going to come. I won't accompany you. And we fade out and fade in. We see Geeta following aunt. This kind of a structure is right through the film. In the very beginning, the owner says, I won't give you the house. And it fades out. Next time, we see they open the door. But what happens in that is, the colors change. The owner in the first scene is using a red shawl, and in the next scene, it's Nasiruddin Shah who is wearing a red shirt. So this kind of a thing, even in the temple scene also, she's wearing bright yellow, Rohini Attangdi, and the next, and Geeta is wearing something else, and in the next scene the color changes. So in that sense, like that, there is no fixed values, there is no fixed answer, there is no fixed this one to our action. I wanted to highlight right through the film. And if you look at the overall structure of the film, Nasiruddin Shah clothes move from red to yellow. The last scene is wearing a yellow shirt, on top of the terrace. And the film also moves from red to yellow. And the relationship also moves from red to yellow, tense. Red, we often say a danger, but not in this film, because red here is auspicious because it's a kumkum. From red, it moves to yellow, which is tense, which is used which he uses to drive away the aunts. Well, aunt and aunt, I didn't mean it, of course.
So, speaking about Geeta and her lack of comfort with a couple of obscene jokes which were placed strategically throughout the film, and given the nature of your films and your script, which have very little space for nonsense, so these obscene jokes, was it for the audience to look at Geeta from in a very different sense as she starts attending parties and changes a lot more from the way we started seeing her?
Could you repeat the question? What happens in the...
So what the obscene jokes which were which were placed here and there, one by Naziruddin Shah, the other by Auntie. So it reflected on Geeta's lack of comfort with such jokes.
Yeah.
Was it
actually I placed these jokes because all the three jokes are something to do with their husband and wife relationship, or something to do with their ribald jokes, something to do with the sex life or something to do with the sex. Towards the end, in fact, the relationship between husband and wife, as it gets strained. In the beginning, they are sleeping in the same cot and talking about, dreaming about a ideal house and all that. But towards the end, that kind of a equation is not there. So Nasiruddin Shah, Rajana, tries to woo Geeta by resorting to such kind of ribald jokes. There's no physical intimacy. And he's trying to recreate that by this kind of a external device. So I wanted that to highlight that the relationship between husband and wife is becoming colder and colder. So they need external this one to rake it up. So that's why I have used these kind of jokes. Otherwise, he could have cracked any joke, but he only talks about the jokes something to do with husband and wife relationship or with the sex.
True, and we see Geeta react to each of these jokes very differently throughout the film.
Yeah, towards the end, she doesn't even react to the jokes. When he says, that the bangle joke, she doesn't even react to it.
That's true. And speaking of Geeta and Auntie and their interaction at the cemetery, So we look at the whole discussion and the whole conflict here. And we think about financial freedom and financial stability as a way toward equality. Were you, in some sense, hinting at financial stability towards feminism in some sense, sir? I think quite like your contemporaries or your subsequent filmmakers such as Sethuram with his Manthana and Anavarna.
So I was telling you earlier, no, it's not unidimensional. I have not constructed the scene to say, now she has achieved everything. But you also see there's one movement towards a liberalization, this one, to free herself. But there's equally, another movement which is moving in the opposite direction, wherein she loses her self-respect and things like that. So it's not easy to say this is right or this is wrong. You have to, value it. We have to balance it. We have to, evaluate the pros and cons, looking at this kind of a complex one. That's why I said it's very difficult. I don't want the film to say this is it. This is feminist statement. No, it's not merely a feminist statement. This is about urbanization. No, I'm not talking about urbanization. That's what I'm. I'll be very happy if one can say all those kind of what is it, movements moving in opposite directions. Parallel streaks, but then the things are moving in opposite and different directions.
Interesting. Thank you, sir. And we can go on to talking. We can go on talking about to talk about sir's filmography. And if there are any questions regarding the film, I think we can address them now. So, speaking of your filmography, it is interesting to notice that only with Hasina, it seems like there was an active voice directing the audience to pick up and do something about it. And it seems like Hasina is the only film where you have had that activist noise. Was there a particular reason for you to have shifted in this manner, and why particularly with Hasina?
I didn't understand the second question. Only in Hasina,
So we don't really see your films in any sense directing the audience to think in a particular manner, and it seems like you take the role of a documentarian. And only with Hasina, and especially toward the end, we see that the audience and the characters in the film are directed to do something, directed to act toward the abuse toward women. Was there a particular reason that you chose Hasina to do it?
Actually, one of the reasons that stems from the style of the filmmaking itself. Hasina is the only film in my career where I have used melodramatic format. When one uses the melodramatic format, he also uses a little emotionally strong narrative. When you take emotionally strong narrative, you go with the character, and here actually the character of Hasina has been cornered by all the people, and I wanted some kind of a voice, some kind of a statement to be made in the end. But it doesn't stem only in the end. You said it comes in the end. No, it doesn't. See, the cinema in Hasina, we go back and forth. It is constructed with using 4 flashbacks. So 5 flashbacks. 5 flashbacks correspond to the 5 namaz they perform in the film, in their daily life. With each namaz, one sect of people, start supporting Hasina. Hasina, who is sat in front of the mosque asking for alimony. In the first namaz, it was Rahim Kaka, and in the second one, it's Mullah, and the third, it is children, and the fourth, it is women, and final one, it is the Mutwalli, who is the chairman of the mosque committee. So they change their heart. They come to support Hasina. So since I have used the structure, I also have to use some kind of a chronological you know chronologically
Framework.
accumulating dramatic structure. And the fourth one, where women come to her support, is one can also interpret as a kind of a imaginary one, because the when Hasina throws the paper, each paper flies and goes and falls inside the compound of a, which is unrealistic. So from there, I move to a kind of a slightly unrealistic format. So that's where you see the action happening. So action is not real. It's actually uh, it's imagined. Whose imagination is that? It's left to you. It's it's something like in my other film, Kanasemba Kudureyaneri. The third segment is totally imaginary. It's imagination. It's my story. I would say it's director's story. It's what director wants the area to do, to follow. So that way, without stating it so obviously, director takes kind of a suggestion. To use Anantamurthy's phrase, he says they are all hooks. In your statement, you leave a lot of hooks on which audience can plug their views, and that acts as a kind of a the kind of a this one to think on those lines. It's a peg on which one can hang its arguments. But that arguments are not like Ajit Prop documents where you can directly make the statement. I don't do those kind of things. I would rather suggest and leave it that.
True. And since you brought up Mr. U.R. Anantmurthy, it seems like U.R. Anantmurthy's works had been a staple, especially during your time of filmmaking, especially in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And it seems like a, a lot of uh, celebrated directors, such as yourself, have picked up U.R. Anantmurthy's novels, and they have made a film based on his story. Was there a particular choice to pick U.R. Anantmurthy, and I think it's S.L. Bhairappa comes right after U.R. Anantmurthy in terms of adaptation. Was there a particular choice to pick U.R. Anantmurthy, sir?
Well, in my case, because I had liked the story very much, so I picked it up. But I think you're right. I think there are five, six films based on his works: Samskara, Ghatashraddha, Para,
Mauni.
obviously, Mauni, and one more, which one was it? Yeah, this one, Prakriti. These were the and now, of course, because I believe Suryan Kudri also has been made into film. One of the reasons why people opted for Anantmurthy short stories are very obvious, because one is that he has one writer whose work is full of visual details, strong visual elements. It's very well. While I was adopting Ghatashraddha, I was really very very happy because there are a lot of things which I could straight away pick up from the novel short story itself. Uh, One is that he has a very, at least in the earlier stages, at least in all these films, on all these short stories on which his films are based, they have a very strong dramatic narrative. And there's the dramatic narrative is not merely because of it doesn't have only the dramatic elements, it also has conceptual strength to it. This is something which you must realize, because Anandmurthy is one writer whose events, whose flow of narrative thread, in whose stories the narrative thread has both ideological as well as experiential elements within it. And at least that helped me a lot while making Ghatashraddha. But I was more influenced by his thought process more than his creative constructions, creative works. Here's one writer who has written extensively on various subjects. There are 18 volumes of writings, on various social issues. You just pick up and read them. You will suddenly, it widens your perception and you make you think from different directions. In fact, I have also quoted in another interview that the whole character of Krishna in Dweepa has come to me with a different perspective while I was reading one article by Anantamurthy. He talks about the film, Robert Flaherty's film Nanook of the North. Say Nanook is an Eskimo. This one, he has a great skill to make his igloo and hunt his food and all that. And Anand Murthy very beautifully explains the kind of a self-confidence it is there in him. And he says, just introduce a white man there, and everything gets, he loses his self-confidence. These kinds of insights, suddenly make me realize, yes, that's exactly what happens when Krishna lands in Dweepa. Ganapa was very confident of his running his own house and with his own skills, suddenly feels that he's incompetent, he's incapable. It happens with all of us, Like Lohia said it, there are three things which makes you feel, inferior. One is the caste. Second is the education, he especially says English. Third is the monetary position. So if one is very rich, if he's a billionaire, suddenly we think he's equipped better than me. If one is from an upper caste, a man from the this one says probably he knows better than me. Similarly, the third one he says urbanization, urban. If somebody from city always creates an impression in a villager that he knows better than me. This happens with the caste, the education, especially English, and the social structure, urban versus this one. And of course the monetary. If one is rich, then we tend to give more importance to him. Then I have talked about that in Kanasemba Kudureyaneri. Why people laugh at area and not at Matadaya because of the social structure. Because he is from an upper caste and the area is from a lower caste, and our area is drunk all the time. Matadaya looks very, sage-like with his white cloth and all that, and he's from a, he's the owner of he's the caretaker of a wada, and this man is is there with a short, torn cloth and all that. So you immediately, by that kind of situation itself, you create a kind of a complexities within the characters. So such insights I got while reading a lot of articles by Anantamurthy and many others, not just Anantamurthy. In fact, I am grateful to writers in Kannada, also in other languages in English, who make us think from a different perspective because of through their writings.
Interesting. And we had heard that you are a voracious reader, but I think we got a very brief glimpse of how it goes on. So thank you about that, sir. Also, being a filmmaker in a movement in its prime, could you also talk about why there weren't as many vivid and diverse stories on various social issues such as LGBTQ or um, radical feminism in Kannada films?
I won't be able to answer this question because as a filmmaker, I can only talk about the issues which bother me much, about which I have the first-hand experience.
Was it reflective of the social fabric back then? Was it reflective of the social fabric and the the necessities the audience expected from the filmmakers?
Not really. Actually, in Karnataka, that way, you don't have filmmakers from different background and with different positions, and that's one of the reason why we don't see so many diverse approach to filmmaking. You don't see so many different thematic constructs in the film. So you can, if you look at the background of all these filmmakers, many of the filmmakers, they fall into some 2 or 3 categories and not more than that. Unlike in other languages, where people come, filmmakers come from other strata of society. We don't have that. Even when they come from other strata of the society, somewhere they are people, the industry squeezes them into one of these 3 slots, 3 or 4 slots. The experimentation can come only when the filmmakers' films are accepted by the public, which doesn't happen in Canada. Only certain kinds of films get accepted by the Kannada film-going audience. That reflects in the kind of films that we churn up in Kannada, whether it is mainstream cinema or offbeat cinema.
That's
Just
right.
imagine when I made this film, Money, they didn't even realize that it uses a different format altogether. And when I made Hasina, they dismissed, many of the serious critics dismissed, saying that it is very, they used a very, very emotional. Well, they didn't realize it's melodramatic consciously. In fact, a professor of mine is writing a book on this film, saying that how melodrama has been used in Girish's films, especially in this film. Similarly, when Kanasemba Kudureyaneri was done, many people thought it was very confusing because it's not edited properly. They didn't realize it's a very conscious choice to go back and forth, retell the same story. They thought it's bad editing. So that is probably the what is limiting Kannada industry to flourish into a different filmmaking, different this one altogether.
That is sad to know. And thank you, sir. So, Mohammed has a question, and it takes us back to the film, if that's okay with you, sir. So, Mohammed asks if the movie is about antisocial elements on individuals, and does it compare with the urban and rural life in any form or manner?
Why does he think about antisocial? Which is the antisocial according to him?
I'm not sure. I'm just.
No,
Sir,
yeah, please go ahead.
ಸರ್ ನನಗೇನ್ ಅನ್ಸ್ತು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ರಾಜಣ್ಣ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಇದಾರಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಕ್ಕಪಕ್ಕ ಇರೋ ನೈಬರ್ಸ್ ಜೊತೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ಹೊಂದಾಣಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ಸ್ತು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಅವ್ನ್ ಕೆಲ್ಸ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ ಆ ಪೇಲ್ವಾರ್ ಹತ್ರ ಹೋದ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಹತ್ರ ಹೋದ. ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಮುಂಚೆ ಅವ್ರು ಮಾತಾಡ್ಸೋದು, ಮಿಂಗಲ್ ಆಗೋದು ಯೋಚನೆನೆ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ನನಗೇನೋ ಅದು ರೂರಲ್ ಲೈಫ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹಂಗಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಹಳ್ಳಿ ಕಡೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ನಾವು ಅಕ್ಕಪಕ್ಕ ಯಾರಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂತೀವಿ. ಅದು ನನಗೇನೋ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಅಂತ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳಿದೆ.
ನೋ ನಾನೇನು ಹೇಳಕ್ ಹೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ಒಂಥರ ರಾಜಣ್ಣನ ಒಂದು ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಫ್ ಯುನೋ ವಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ ರೈಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ವಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ ರಾಂಗ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಇಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಹಿಮ್ ಅಂತ. ಅವನ ಹೋಲ್ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ನ ಅವನ ಇಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ವಿತ್ ದ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಚಾಡ್ ವಠಾರ ಅಂತೀವಲ್ಲ, ವಠಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ಉಳಿದವ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಅವನು ಆ ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಜೊತೆಗೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಓಡಾಟ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಐ ವೋಂಟ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಟು ಸೇ ಯುನೋ ಅದನ್ನೊಂಥರ ಇಡೀ ರೂರಲ್ ಲೈಫಿನ ಸಿಂಬಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಅವನನ್ನು ನೋಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಅವನ ಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೇನು ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊರಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಡಿಫಿಕಲ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ವರ್ಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಆರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವನು ಆ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಆಗಿಯೂ ನಿಜ ಆಗಬೇಕು, ಅವನು ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿಯ ಸಿಗ್ನಿಫೈಯರ್ ಆಗಿಯೂ ಇದಾಗಬೇಕು, ಒಂದು ಟೈಮಿನ ಸಿಗ್ನಿಫೈಯರ್ ಆಗಿಯೂ ಆಗಬೇಕು. ಹಾಗೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರುವಾಗ ನೀವು ಎಲ್ಲದನ್ನೂ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಅಟ್ ದ ಸೇಮ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಆ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಒಂದು ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಾಲಿಟಿಯೂ ಬೇಕು. ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಥರದ ಕೆಲವು ಇದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ನಾನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೆ ಆ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು. ಈ ಥರದ ಕೆಲವು ಹೇಳಿಕೆಗಳಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದನ್ನು ನಾನು ಒಪ್ಪಲ್ಲ. ಐ ಆಮ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಎ ವಿಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋರು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಬ್ರಾಡ್ ಮೈಂಡೆಡ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ವಿಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಟಿಲಿ ಇರೋರು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮೈಂಡೆಡ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಅನ್ನುವ ಥರದ ಸಿಂಪ್ಲಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಇದನ್ನು, ಅದು ಅರ್ಬನ್ ರೂರಲ್ ಡಿವೈಡಿಗೆ ಆಗಲಿ, ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ವೈಸ್ ಡಿವೈಡಿಗೆ ಆಗಲಿ, ಎಜುಕೇಟೆಡ್ ವರ್ಸಸ್ ಅನ್ಎಜುಕೇಟೆಡ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಆಗಲಿ, ಆ ಥರದ ಸಿಂಪ್ಲಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಆದಂಥ ಇದನ್ನು ಡಿವೈಡನ್ನು ನಾನು ಒಪ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕೆ ರೆಡಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ it's a fact that which is there in Rajana's character right through the film. ಅವನ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಅಷ್ಟನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟು is not ready to accept anything beyond that. ಅದೇ ನಾನು ಆಗ ಹೇಳಿದ್ನಲ್ಲ, ಅವನಿಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗ್ತದೋ ಆ ಶೆಡ್ ಓನರಿಗೂ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತ is not ready to accept it. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಆಂಟಿ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾನು ಒಪ್ಪಲ್ಲ. But a man with a closed perspective
of individual
point ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಒಂಥರ ಬ್ಲಿಂಕರ್ಡ್ ವ್ಯೂ ಅಂತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಆ ಬ್ಲಿಂಕರ್ಡ್ ವ್ಯೂ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ನಾವು ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಆ ಬ್ಲಿಂಕರ್ಡ್ ವ್ಯೂ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಇನ್ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ನೀವು ನೋಡಿರ್ಬೋದು, ನಮ್ಮ ಅರ್ಬನ್ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮನೆ ಮುಂದ್ಗಡೆ ನಾವು ಗಾಡಿ ಬಂದು ನಿಲ್ಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಲ್ಲು ಇಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅದ್ರ ಪಕ್ಕದ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಡಿ ಬಂದು ನಿಂತರೆ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತೀವಿ. ನಮ್ಮನೆ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕಲ್ವಾ? ಅಥವಾ ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆನೂ ಕೇಳಲ್ಲ, ನಾನು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಹೇಗೆ ಇಡಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಕಲ್ಲು ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಅದು ನಂದಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಎ BBMP ಪ್ರಾಪರ್ಟಿ. ಈ ಥರದ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ನಾವು ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅದು ಆಂಟಿ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಬ್ಲಿಂಕರ್ಡ್ ವ್ಯೂ ಅಂತ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ. ಆ ಬ್ಲಿಂಕರ್ಡ್ ವ್ಯೂನ ರಾಜಣ್ಣ ಅವನ ಇಡೀ ಸಿನಿಮಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವನ ಇಡೀ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾರಣ ಆಗೋದೇ ಆ ಬ್ಲಿಂಕರ್ಡ್ ವ್ಯೂ. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಡೂ ವಿತ್ ಅರ್ಬನೈಸೇಷನ್ ಅಥವಾ ಇದನ್ನು. ನಾನು ಮುಂಚಿನ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಇದು ಈ ಥರ ಯಾವುದೋ ಕೆಲವು ಸ್ಕೀಮ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಲೆಟ್ ಅಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಟ್ರೈ ಟು ಫಿಟ್ ಇನ್ ಅರ್ಬನ್ ವರ್ಸಸ್ ರೂರಲ್, ಅಪ್ಪರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಸಸ್ ಲೋ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಬೇಡ ಅಂತ.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್.
I think we can take 2 more questions and we can close the discussion. So Anirudh, you can go ahead with your question.
ಸರ್, ಇವಾಗ ಅಜ್ಜಿದು ಸೀನ್ ಬಂದಾಗ ರಾಜಣ್ಣ NOC ತಗೊಂಡು ಅವ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು NOC ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಸೈನ್ ಹಾಕಿ ಅಂತ. ಅವಾಗ ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ನಾನು ಈ ಹಿಂದೆ ಒಂದ್ಸತಿ ಈ ಥರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸೈನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾನು ತಾಪತ್ರಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕಾಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೆ ಅಂತ ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಇನಿಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೀನಲ್ಲಿ ರಾಜಣ್ಣ ಅವನ ಗೀತಾಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಹೊಸ ದಂಪತಿಗಳು ಯಾರು ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಅಜ್ಜಿಗೆ ಅದು ತುಂಬಾ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗತ್ತೆ, ಅಥವಾ ಅವರು ನೋಡಕ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಸರ್? ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಜ್ಜಿಗೆ ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಈ ತರ ಮೋಸ ಆಗಿದ್ದು, ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಯಾವ್ದೇ ಹೊಸ ಕುಟುಂಬ ಬಂದಾಗ ಅವ್ರ ಕೈಲಿ ಸಹಿಸ್ಕೊಳಕ್ ಆಗದೆ ಇರೋ ಅಂತದ್ದು?
ಹಾಗೆ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಡಿ ನೀವು. ಅಜ್ಜಿಯ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಇಂದ ಈ ಕಥೆಯನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳಕ್ ನೋಡಿ. ಅಜ್ಜಿಗೆ ಶಿಸ್ ಎ ವಿಡೋ ಅಲ್ವಾ, ಗಂಡ ಇರಲ್ಲ. ಎಷ್ಟು ವರ್ಷದ ವೈವಾಹಿಕ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸಿದಾಳೆ ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೇನ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರಿಂದಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಗಂಡಸು ಒಂದು ಹೆಂಗಸು ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ನಕ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಒಂಥರದ ಅಸಹನೆ ಆಗೋದು ಸಹಜ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು. ಆ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ. ಬಟ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಸೇಮ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಹಂಗಂದ್ರೆ ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಹಾರ್ಟ್ಲೆಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಹೃದಯನೇ ಇಲ್ಲದವರ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಸೈನಕಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೆ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಅದರಿಂದ ನಾನು ಸಾಕಲ್ಲ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾಳೆ. ಕಾಂಟ್ರಡಿಕ್ಷನ್ ಇದೆ. ಅದೇ ನನಗೆ ಬ್ಯೂಟಿ ಅನ್ಸೋದು. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದ್ ಕಡೆ ಅವಳು ಕೆಟ್ಟವಳ ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾಳೆ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ ಕಡೆ ಅವಳು ಬಹಳ ಉದಾರಿಯಾಗಿ ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾಳೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ. ಕೆಟ್ಟವಳು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು ತಪ್ಪಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದ್ ಕಡೆ ಅವಳ ಒಂಥರದ ಸಿನಿಸಿಸಮ್ ಇದೆ ಅಥವಾ ಒಂಥರದ ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಕುತೂಹಲ ಇದೆ ಅಂತದೆ. ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ ಕಡೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಉದಾರವಾದ ವಿಶಾಲವಾದ ಹೃದಯ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಸಿ ದಟ್ಸ್ ವೈ ದ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಬಿಕಮ್ ದೇ ಡು ನಾಟ್ ಬಿಕಮ್ ಯೂನಿಡೈಮೆನ್ಷನಲ್. ಅವಳು ಹಿಂಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಡೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಅದು ಹಂಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಡೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀರ. ದ ಫ್ಲಾಟ್ ಮಾನೋಡೈಮೆನ್ಷನಲ್ ಅದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅವೆಲ್ಲ. ಏನೋ ಈ ಥರದ ಎಷ್ಟು ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗಳನ್ನು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಕೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲರ್ ಸಿನಿಮಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಥರ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ನಾವು ಅಟ್ಯಾಚ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀವಿ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಗೆ. ಇವನು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯವನು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ನು ರೈಟ್ ಥ್ರೂ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯವನಾಗಬೇಕು. ಅವನು ಸಿಗರೇಟ್ ಸೇದಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವನು ಏನೋ ಯಾವತ್ತೂ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯದೇ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಅವ್ನು ಕೆಟ್ಟದಾಗಿ ಬೈಯಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕಾಗಬಾರ್ದು? ರಾಜ ಅಂದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಅವನು ಭಾಳ ಶುಭ್ರವಾದ ಭಾಷೆಯನ್ನೇ ಬಳಸ್ತಾನೆ ಅಂತ ಈ ಥರದ ಕೆಲವು ಕೆಟ್ಟ ನೋಷನ್ಗಳಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ. ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಐತಿಹಾಸಿಕ ಸಿನಿಮಾಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಥರದ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಭೂಯಿಷ್ಠವಾದಂಥ ಭಾಷೆಯನ್ನು ನಾವು ಬಳಸ್ತೀವಿ. ಆದರೆ ಕಾರ್ನಾಡರ ತಲೆದಂಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿಜ್ಜಳನಿಗೆ ಉತ್ತರ ಕನ್ನಡದ ಡೈಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ, ಮಗನಿಗೆ ಬೈತಾನೆ, ಅದು ಯಾಕೆ ಕಾಲೆತ್ತಿ ನಾಯಿ ಹುಚ್ಚ ಹೋಯ್ದಂಗೆ ಹುಚ್ಚ ಎತ್ತಿದ್ಯಾ ಅಂತ. ರಾಜ ಹೇಳೋ ಮಾತಾ ಅನ್ಸ್ಬೋದು ನಿಮಗೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ರಾಜನೂ ಒಬ್ಬ ಮನುಷ್ಯ, ರಾಜನಿಗೂ ಒಬ್ಬ ಮಗ ಇರ್ತಾನೆ, ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಮಗ, ಅವನಿಗೂ ಅದೇ ಥರ ಬೈದಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಈ ಥರ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಹ್ಯೂಮನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾವಾಗ ಹ್ಯೂಮನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಹೀಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಣ್ಣ ಒಂದಕ್ಕೊಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಡಿಕ್ಟರಿ ಆಗುವಂಥದ್ದು ಅಥವಾ ಈ ಥರದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದಾಗ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ವಿಚ್ I don't know whether it's right or wrong. I have been using it right through the film. ನಾಗಿ ಗಣಪ, ನಾಗಿ ದ್ವೀಪದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಟ್ ಒನ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಶಿ ಸೇಸ್, ಐ ವಿಶ್ ದ ಹೋಲ್ ಏರಿಯಾ ಇಸ್ ಡ್ಯಾಮ್ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮುಳುಗಿದ್ರೆ ಒಳ್ಳೇದಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಹಂಗಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾಳೆ ಅವಳು ಓನರು. ಅವಾಗಲಾದರೂ ನಮ್ಮನೆಯವರು ನೇಮ ಮಾಡೋದು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬೇರೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡೋತಾರೇನೋ ಅಂತ. ಅವಳು ಹಂಗಂತ ಹೇಳೋರನ್ನ ನೀವು ಸೆಲ್ಫಿಶ್ ಅನ್ನೋಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗತ್ತಾ? ಇಂಥ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಊರು ಮುಳುಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಅವಳು ಮುಳುಗ್ಲಿಂದ ಆಸೆ ಪಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಳೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ? ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅವಳಿಗೊಂದು ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಆದಂಥ ಒಂದು ರೀಸನ್ ಇದೆ. ಅದೇನಾಗಿ ಟುವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ದ ಎಂಡ್ ಶಿ ಸೇಸ್, ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇ ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ ಇನ್ ದ ದ್ವೀಪ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಶಿ ಹೂ ಸೇವ್ಸ್ ದ ಹಸ್ಬೆಂಡ್. So that makes it a very complex, the character very complex. In fact, I can quote any number of such examples from the world classics.
So, sir, it's usually a style in your film where there is an individual and personal story evolving against an evolving backdrop, and this evolving backdrop and background is usually a historical moment. For example, with Thaayi Saheba, it was the independence. With Ghar, it was the rampant globalization that was happening. So, is there a particular choice, a particular reason you go with this choice?
Somehow, I always believe that man is a social being. Man or woman. All our actions, all our determinations, all our this one are in one way or the other influenced by what is happening around us. We don't live in isolation. We are not islands. So it always fascinates me to understand how these decisions of an individual is uh, uh, anchored by what is happening outside world. There's a osmosis of osmosis of ideas of domestic as well as the outside world. And in all my films, I want to capture that osmosis.
Thank you, sir. And it's been almost 1.5 hours. I think we can close the discussion here. So before you leave, sir, there are some aspiring filmmakers in the discussion. Do you have any leaving remarks for them?
I don't want to, give sermons like that. Only aspiring filmmakers, if they write something and if they want my reaction to it, they can bring it home and then I can read it and give my recommendations. But I'll tell you one thing: the film, or for that matter, even the work of art or even a work of fiction, is created by the person, and it's very personal. What you think right, I may not think it. I may not find it, appealing, and you have to give that leverage when you come to me to, ask opinion. I tell you, Ghatashraddha was my first script. My professor said it's very well written. Then I took it to Sadanand Suvarna. He really liked it, and he said, "I will produce the film." My cinematographer read the script and said it's very beautiful. But I also gave it to others. Like Girish Kasaravalli said it's a bad script. B.V. Karan said it won't hold attention at all. Kesal Swami Ravi said at the most half an hour is possible with this script. And YNK said it is full of cliches. So, but when I made the film, these very same people, appreciated it. So I very often ask this question. It happened with me also. Somebody came to me with the script. I said, the novel is not interesting. Then she came to me with the script. I said, script is better than the novel. And then she made the film. I said, now it's much better than everything. I couldn't have imagined such a beautiful film from the novel. So what? But we can actually discuss certain things. What happens, when you discuss ideas with another friend, so a lot of defects that is there will surface, and you will realize yourself. Similarly, you also realize the strength of the script. When I say this particular thing is not working, then you will think about it, and then you suddenly reassess your own decision. Why do I think it works? And then you get clarity. So that's why you need to discuss the script with a few people whose views and opinions you value, but you don't have to take it en masse. You don't have to take it verbatim. You take it and then again reconsider it. So if you have written any script, or if you want to make a film, if you want to discuss it with, then I am there. You can just come in, walk in, and then we can discuss. But I also make the statement with a caveat that you don't have to take my advice verbatim.
I'm very certain a lot of them are ecstatic right now, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
And we are very grateful.